Here, let me, Johnathan said, easily loosening the knot on his mentor's apron strings so they fell free, enabling the old man to lift it off over his head with shaking hands. It pained Johnathan to see how much Alfred had deteriorated already. Johnathan had studied under Alfred for 3 years, learning all there was to know about remedial alchemy, from how to define a customer's problems to mixing the right powders for their medicine. The work had been hard, but under his mentor's guidance, Johnathan had slowly picked it up until he was proficient. In another year, he would have been able to take his exam and become an alchemical apothecary himself. Yet for the time being at least, that dream would have to be put on hold. Alfred had been diagnosed with acute energy loss, a disease which had no cure, and soon would leave him bedridden, unable to work at all. And because Johnathan was not yet qualified to take over, the Board of Alchemists had deemed it necessary to close the shop for good. Alfred's clients had taken their business elsewhere, and all that was left to do now was to finish packing up their well-used equipment. "Thank you, my boy. We've only got one job left," Alfred said softly, resting on a stool next to the carefully packed boxes containing the many tools and ingredients he'd used daily for the past 40 years. "The lettering outside needs to be scraped off." Johnathan cast his eyes to the floor, a cold, empty feeling settling in his stomach. Scraping away the sign had such a finality to it. He wasn't sure if he was ready. "But I'll need a ladder for that. Do we even have one?" he asked, knowing full well that there was one tucked away in the back cupboard, half rotten and full of cobwebs. "A ladder?" Alfred chuckled warmly. "Nonsense, John. You're a gangly young thing. Hop up on one of those stools and I'm sure you'll be able to reach it. There's a metal scraper in the second drawer to your right. I left it out especially. It should be sharp enough to do the job." Opening the drawer, Johnathan found the scraper, a short-handled tool with a flat, triangular blade. He tested it with his thumb and concluded that it was, indeed, sharp enough. After sprinkling a mix of powders over his newly earned cut to help stop the bleeding, he reluctantly gathered one of the round wooden stools and headed outside to where the words, "A. Van Colt, Alchemical Apothecary," were stenciled above the shop's broad windows in large white lettering. Despite being tall, one of Jonathan's biggest fears was heights. Even being a few feet off the ground, as he was then, trying to balance himself on the stool's small seat, was enough to make him dizzy. Still, he couldn't leave this job to Alfred. If the old man exerted himself too much, it would only advance his condition, and by order of the Board of Alchemists, the shop had to be completely bare by the time they were due to leave the premises that afternoon. So, gripping the outer wall for dear life, Johnathan steeled himself and began scraping the words away. The peelings floated down to the floor like snowflakes, and by the time he was finished, real snow was beginning to fall from the darkening sky. "Well, John," Alfred said when Johnathan finally came back inside, "I think that's everything."